You've heard them in movies, in commercials, in the background of 100 different moments, but the name never stuck. Here are 10 songs from the 60s you've heard and don't know the name. Number 10, Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs, 1962. Green Onions was recorded almost by accident. In the summer of 1962, Booker T. Jones and the MGs, the house band at Stax Records in Memphis, were waiting in the studio for another session to begin when they started playing around with an instrumental groove. The track they put down that day, built around Jones's Hammond organ over a minimal blues structure, became one of the most recognizable pieces of music of the entire decade and one of the best-selling instrumental singles in the history of American popular music. The song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart, staying at the top of the R&B chart for 4 weeks. Booker T. Jones was 17 years old when it was recorded. The lineup on the session, Jones on organ, Steve Cropper on guitar, Louis Steinberg on bass, and Al Jackson Jr. on drums, became one of the most important rhythm sections in American music, eventually backing virtually every major Stax artist through the 1960s, including Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, and Rufus Thomas. Steinberg was later replaced by Donald Duck Dunn, and that version of the band continued to function as Stax's in-house recording unit through the decade's most productive years. The recording itself has a quality that is almost impossible to manufacture deliberately, a looseness and confidence that comes from musicians playing with no particular objective, finding a pocket and staying in it. Cropper's guitar figure, which answers the organ on the offbeats, is one of the most copied rhythm guitar lines in American music, and Jackson's drumming underneath it established a standard for understated, perfectly placed groove that session drummers have been studying since the day it was released. Green Onions has appeared in more films and television productions than can be easily counted. It plays in the background of diners, car scenes, and period pieces set in the 1960s with such frequency that it has become shorthand for the era itself. Its opening organ riff is among the most immediately recognizable in American music, and yet the combination of its title and its artist has remained, for most casual listeners, perpetually just out of reach. People who grew up in the 1960s heard it constantly. People born in every decade since have heard it constantly. Virtually everyone recognizes it within 2 bars, and almost nobody can name it without prompting. Number 9, Sunny by Bobby Hebb, 1966.
Thank you for the sunshine you gave.
Bobby Hebb wrote Sunny in the 48 hours following one of the worst weekends of his life. On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The following day, Hebb's brother Harold was killed in a stabbing outside a Nashville nightclub. Hebb, who was then a performer working the club circuit, sat down and wrote Sunny as a deliberate act of emotional opposition, a song about light and warmth and gratitude composed directly in response to grief and shock. He has spoken in interviews about the experience of writing it as a discipline, a decision to face darkness without surrendering to it. The song was recorded in 1966 and reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, kept from the top spot by Summer in the City by the Lovin' Spoonful. It also reached number 3 on the R&B chart, making it a genuine crossover success that found audiences in multiple markets simultaneously. The song's melody, bright, rising, built on a chord progression that moves upward and resolves into warmth rather than tension, gave it the emotional quality Hebb had been reaching for. It is a structurally optimistic melody in a literal sense, the harmonic movement reinforcing the sentiment of the words throughout.
You gave to me your all in all.
Sunny has been covered more than 300 times by artists across virtually every genre. Boney M recorded a disco version in 1976 that was a major international hit, introducing the song to an entirely new generation of listeners. Stevie Wonder, Frank Sinatra, Cher, James Brown, and Georgie Fame have all recorded versions. It was listed by BMI as one of the 50 most performed songs in the history of American music, a list that represents consistent commercial activity across decades rather than a single period of popularity. Most people who hear Sunny recognize it immediately as a song they have known their whole lives, often without being able to identify either its title or the man who wrote it during two of the most painful days he ever experienced. Hebb died in August 2010 in Nashville. He was 72 years old. The song he wrote in grief over a November weekend in 1963 has been a source of pleasure for listeners who never knew anything about the circumstances that produced it, which may be the most accurate measure of what he was trying to accomplish when he sat down to write it.
Funny one so true, I love you.
Number 8. Soulfinger by the Bar-Kays, 1967. The Bar-Kays were a Memphis soul group who served as a secondary backing band at Stax Records alongside Booker T and the MGs. They were young. Most of the original members were teenagers when the band formed, and they had developed a tight, energetic sound that fit naturally into the Stax approach to rhythm and blues. Soulfinger was their debut single, released in 1967, and it reached number 3 on the R&B chart and number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song is built on a rhythm guitar riff, a punchy horn section, and crowd noise. Actual chanting and shouting recorded live that was layered into the track to give it an immediate party-starting energy. The effect worked. Soulfinger communicated the feeling of a room full of people having a good time in a way that made the listener feel included in it, and radio stations played it throughout the summer of 1967 accordingly. In December 1967, most of the original Bar-Kays were killed in the plane crash that also took the life of Otis Redding on a flight from Cleveland to Madison, Wisconsin. The plane went down in Lake Monona. Of the 6 band members on the flight, only trumpeter Ben Cauley survived, having managed to grab a seat cushion and stay afloat in the freezing water until rescue came. Phelan Jones, Ronnie Caldwell, Carl Cunningham, Jimmy King, and Matthew Kelly all died. The tragedy cut short a group that had produced only one major single and had every reason to produce many more. The Bar-Kays were eventually reconstituted with new members. Ben Cauley continued and helped rebuild the lineup, and the reconstituted band went on to have a second period of commercial success in the 1970s and 1980s with a funk-oriented sound that differed significantly from the original group. But the original band that recorded Soulfinger existed for barely a year, and the song they left behind has been heard in films, television commercials, and sporting events consistently for over 50 years, almost always without the audience having any idea who made it or what became of them. Number 7, Time Has Come Today by the Chambers Brothers, 1968. The Chambers Brothers were a South Carolina-born, Los Angeles-based group consisting of 4 brothers, George, Willie, Lester, and Joe Chambers, plus drummer Brian Keenan. They had developed a sound that merged gospel, blues, folk, and rock in ways that had no clean category in the late 1960s and placed them at the intersection of the soul and psychedelic rock movements simultaneously. Time Has Come Today was originally recorded in 1966 as a shorter track clocking in at just under 3 minutes. The version that found significant commercial success was a heavily extended recording released in 1968 that ran over 11 minutes in its full album form. The edited single, trimmed for radio play, reached number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. The full-length version, with its distorted guitar, echo-drenched vocals, clock sounds ticking and chiming at intervals throughout, and passages of near silence before the band surges back in, became a staple of underground FM radio at a time when album-oriented stations were beginning to program longer, more exploratory material that commercial AM radio would never touch. The song's recording was partly a product of the era's experimentation in the studio. Producer David Rubinson worked with the band to extend and layer the track, adding the clock sounds and the spatial effects that give it its slightly hallucinatory quality. The result was a song that functioned differently depending on how it was heard, as a tightly edited pop track on a single, or as an extended journey on an album or an FM broadcast. The Chambers Brothers toured extensively in the late 1960s and were particularly well regarded as a live act, known for sets that could stretch well beyond what any radio-friendly edit would suggest. They released several more albums before the band's commercial momentum slowed in the early 1970s, and they eventually dissolved. Joe Chambers died in 2018. The song became firmly embedded in the cultural memory of the late 1960s without ever being widely identified by name. Its opening rhythm, the cowbell and guitar pattern that begins the track, is one of those sounds that triggers immediate recognition in people who were alive during that period, and immediate curiosity in people who encounter it later through its repeated use in documentaries and films about the 1960s counterculture. The Chambers Brothers never matched its commercial success with subsequent releases, and the song remained the primary way most people encountered them, without, in most cases, ever knowing the name of the band or the song. Number 6, Classical Gas by Mason Williams, 1968. Mason Williams was a writer and comedian who worked on the writing staff of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS in the late 1960s, when Classical Gas was recorded and released. Williams had been developing the piece as a guitar instrumental for several years before recording it, and it was committed to tape with orchestral accompaniment arranged by Mike Post, who would go on to become one of the most prolific composers of American television theme music, with credits including Law & Order, Hill Street Blues, The A-Team, and Magnum P.I. Classical Gas reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1968, kept from the top spot during a period of fierce competition. It won 3 Grammy Awards at the 1969 ceremony: Best Contemporary Pop Performance, Instrumental, Best Instrumental Arrangement, and Best Instrumental Theme. It was the most decorated instrumental recording of its year, and one of the most awarded guitar pieces in American popular music history. The track builds from a finger-picked acoustic guitar introduction through a series of movements, some of them rapid and technically demanding, others more open and orchestral, before resolving in a way that gives the piece the feeling of a completed journey. Its structure and its emotional arc set it apart from most pop instrumentals of the era, which tended to establish a groove and stay in it rather than develop through distinct sections. Williams returned primarily to comedy writing and television work following the song's success and did not pursue a sustained commercial music career, which contributed substantially to the disconnect between the song's enormous recognition and the near-total anonymity of its creator. Classical Gas has appeared consistently in film soundtracks, television commercials, and sporting event broadcasts for over 50 years. The majority of the audiences hearing it on any given occasion have no idea what it is called or who recorded it, which makes it one of the most successful anonymous pieces of music in American popular culture. Number 5, Grazing in the Grass by Hugh Tequila, 1968. Hugh Tequila was a South African jazz trumpeter who had fled South Africa in 1960 following the Sharpeville massacre, in which South African police opened fire on a crowd of peaceful protesters, killing 69 people. He eventually settled in the United States and built a career as a jazz musician and activist, working across multiple genres and collaborating with artists, including Harry Belafonte, Paul Simon, and Miriam Makeba, his former wife. Grazing in the Grass was an unusual commercial breakthrough for an artist whose work was primarily rooted in jazz and African music traditions. The track was written by Philemon Hu, a South African musician, and was first recorded as an instrumental. Masekela's version, produced by Stuart Levine, is built on a warm, repetitive groove with Masekela's flugelhorn carrying the melody over a relaxed rhythm section, something between jazz, pop, and the South African township music that had shaped Masekela's earliest musical experiences as a teenager in Johannesburg. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1968 and remained there for 2 weeks, making it one of the most successful jazz-influenced recordings ever to top the American pop chart. A vocal version of the song recorded by Friends of Distinction reached number 3 the following year, confirming the melody's broad appeal. Masekela spent the following decades as one of the most politically committed and internationally recognized voices in African music. His 1987 song, Bring Him Back Home, became an anthem for the release of Nelson Mandela and was performed at Mandela's release concert in 1990. He collaborated with Paul Simon on the Graceland tour, and his advocacy for the end of apartheid in South Africa continued from his first years in exile until the political transformation he had spent decades working toward actually occurred. He returned to South Africa after 1990 and continued to perform and record until his death in January 2018. In the United States, however, he remained most widely known as the man behind a bright, breezy instrumental that most people associate with summer and sunshine without connecting it to the complex, politically engaged artist who made it. Grazing in the Grass and the man who played flugelhorn on it in 1968 represent one of the widest separations between a song's cultural presence and its creator's public recognition in the music of that decade. Number 4, the 59th Street Bridge song, Feelin' Groovy by Simon and Garfunkel, 1966. Simon and Garfunkel are not unknown. The Sound of Silence, Mrs. Robinson, and Bridge Over Troubled Water are among the most recognized songs of the 1960s. But the 59th Street Bridge song, subtitled Feelin' Groovy, occupies a different position. It is a song that most people recognize when they hear it without being able to produce its title, partly because the informal subtitle is more well-known than the formal title, and partly because its gentle brevity, the track runs under 2 minutes, makes it feel like a passing thing rather than a landmark. The song was written by Paul Simon and released on the album Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme in 1966. It was also released as a single and reached number 18 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1967. The 59th Street Bridge it references is the Queensboro Bridge in New York City, which spans the East River from Manhattan to Queens. And the song's perspective is that of someone slowing down on the way to work to take in the morning, a deliberately unhurried, present-moment observation that made it a gentle counterpoint to the decade's more urgent protest music. A version recorded by Harper's Bazaar reached number 13 on the Hot 100 in 1967, achieving slightly better chart performance than the Simon and Garfunkel original. The song has appeared in a remarkable number of film and television productions over the decades, used reliably to signal the early 1960s or late 1960s optimism before something goes wrong in the narrative. The title has never fully lodged in popular memory in the way the song's melody has. And, feeling groovy, the phrase everyone remembers from it, has never quite succeeded as a search term for people trying to find out what they are actually hearing.
Let the morning time drop all its petals on me.
Number 3, Tequila by the Champs, 1958/decade-long airplay through the 1960s. Tequila was technically recorded and released in 1958, but it received continuous heavy airplay throughout the 1960s and became, through that decade, one of the most recognizable party tracks in American popular music. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 upon its original release and won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Performance at the first Grammy Awards ceremony in 1959. The Champs were a California instrumental group assembled by Dave Burgess, whose original lineup included Glenn Campbell, later one of the most successful country pop artists of the 1960s and 1970s. As a guitarist, Campbell was not a member when Tequila was recorded in a quick session, but he joined the band shortly after its success and remained for several years. The single spoken word in the entire track, the word tequila, shouted at specific intervals, was delivered by Danny Flores, who also played the saxophone throughout. The song has been heard in virtually every social setting that involves music: parties, sporting events, television commercials, film soundtracks, and school dances across multiple generations. Its opening saxophone riff is one of those sounds that almost anyone who grew up anywhere in the English-speaking world can identify within a single bar. The name, The Champs, and the title Tequila are, for the overwhelming majority of listeners who have heard the song hundreds of times across their lives, a complete mystery. Flores, who recorded under the name Chuck Rio and wrote the song, received little ongoing recognition for a composition that has earned substantial licensing income over the decades. He died in 2006. The song and its creators have existed in one of the longest-running disconnects between ubiquity and recognition in the history of recorded music, a status that its inclusion here only begins to address. Number 2, A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, 1967.
The room was humming harder.
A Whiter Shade of Pale was released in May 1967 and became one of the defining recordings of that year, a year that also produced Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Respect by Aretha Franklin, and Light My Fire by The Doors, which gives some indication of the company it was keeping. The song spent 6 weeks at number 1 in the United Kingdom and reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. It has been estimated to have sold over 10 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling singles in history. Procol Harum were a British rock band built around vocalist and pianist Gary Brooker and lyricist Keith Reid. The two had met through a mutual acquaintance in 1966 and formed the songwriting partnership that defined the band, with Reid writing the words and Brooker setting them to music. The band took its name from the pedigree name of a friend's Burmese cat. The song's organ introduction, developed by keyboardist Matthew Fisher and drawing on Johann Sebastian Bach's Air on the G string from his orchestral suite number 3, as well as elements of his cantata BWV 140, gave it a stately, near-liturgical gravity that had no precedent in pop music and made it immediately distinct from everything else on the radio in 1967.
We skip the light fandango.
The lyrics, written by Reed, were deliberately surreal and impressionistic. Images of Vestal virgins, a fandango, and a miller that resisted and continue to resist literal interpretation. Brooker himself has said in interviews that he was never entirely sure what the song meant, and that the combination of music and words created something that operated beyond the reach of easy explanation. The song's authorship became the subject of a landmark legal case decades later. Matthew Fisher sued for co-writing credit, arguing that his organ introduction was distinctive enough to constitute a compositional contribution. In 2009, the UK House of Lords ruled in Fisher's favor and recognized his co-authorship, though financial compensation was denied because of the length of time he had waited to bring the claim. The ruling established important precedent for how musical contributions are evaluated in copyright law. Gary Brooker died in February 2022. The song he and Fisher and Reed had made together in 1967 had outlasted the legal dispute about who made it and remained one of the most played recordings of its decade. Heard constantly, named almost never. Number 1, In the Midnight Hour by Wilson Pickett, 1965.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour.
Wilson Pickett was born in Prattville, Alabama in 1941 and grew up in Detroit, where he developed the gospel-trained voice that would define everything he recorded. In the Midnight Hour was written by Pickett and Steve Cropper, the same Steve Cropper who played guitar on Green Onions, during a recording session at Stax Records in Memphis in 1965. The story of the song's composition has become one of the most often told in soul music history. Pickett and Cropper wrote the song in a motel room the night before the session, developing the rhythm around a dance move that Pickett had seen at a performance in New York. The song reached number 1 on the R&B chart and number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it became one of the most played records of 1965. The groove it established, built around a delayed backbeat that Cropper and Al Jackson Jr. developed specifically for the track, shifting the emphasis in the rhythm in a way that made it immediately physical, influenced virtually every soul and R&B recording that followed it for the next decade.
All the things I told you in the midnight hour.
In the Midnight Hour has been covered more than times can be easily counted. Joe Cocker, The Grateful Dead, Cross Canadian Ragweed, and dozens of others have recorded versions. It has been used in films and television productions representing every decade from the 1960s onward, its horn-driven opening and Pickett's shouted introduction, making it one of the most recognizable entries in the American soul catalog. Wilson Pickett had a turbulent personal life. Legal troubles and erratic behavior shadowed his career from the 1970s onward. But his voice and the recordings he made at Stax and later at Atlantic remain foundational documents of American music. He died in January 2006 of a heart attack. In the Midnight Hour plays at sporting events, in car commercials, at weddings, and at parties attended by people who were not born when it was recorded. Most of them know exactly what it sounds like and have no idea what it is called or who is singing it, which is precisely the condition this video was made to correct.
Yes, I am. Oh, yes, I am.
The 1960s left behind more songs like these than any other decade. Music so deeply embedded in everyday life that it became wallpaper, heard constantly, and named almost never. If any of these finally got a name attached, hit the like button and subscribe. There is always more to uncover.